So here we are in Camden, and it's a really interesting borough. It's a really interesting council to work for, and it's also a really interesting set of communities with a culture which is sometimes described as having a bit of a rebellious spirit, but certainly is super diverse, is at the heart of London, and is a really vibrant place to work.
I feel like in Camden there's a really good, strong community. Where I live, I know my park keeper, I know my postman, I see the local police officers. I feel like there's a really great sense of community.
So we've been thinking very deeply actually about how you create a whole system response to the needs of children and families and indeed communities. So we've had a programme rolling called the Resilient Families Programme, and that really looks at how you get a continuum of support across early help and into social work, but sees that as one whole system. The Camden model of social work is first of all a framework which is informed by the experiences of children and parents. It's a clear model based on the core belief that the relationship between the social worker and the family are the key asset.
I think for me, the Camden model of social work means something really generative. It's probably one of the most exciting things that I've done in terms of it feeling really co-produced.
When Camden first approached us regarding this commission, they were very clear that they wanted a systemic approach to their social work practice. So we went away with those principles in mind and developed a programme that was really targeted at the entire workforce, social workers, senior practitioners, team managers, service managers up to the director, and we were very clear that the entire workforce needed to have a good introduction to systemic ideas and how they could work in child and family social work practice.
Systemic way gets you to think differently and also to practice differently and feel differently about what you do, and it adds more value in terms of the whole work, and we're hoping that in time that would actually, you'll see real benefits for the client, and the client will say to you, well actually yes, you know, the way you deal with me now is different. We're trying to develop a learning culture, and the idea is that every experience there is something to learn around that, and that systemic way of working gives you the opportunity to learn, and also it gives you the opportunity to say actually when you feel a bit anxious or when you don't know what you're doing, or what's having an impact on you. So it enables us, if we do it properly, to have a kind of an open dialogue, an open and honest dialogue with everyone.
What I liked about the social worker we had, they were always really good at listening. They were just being themselves as well, in terms of obviously they were doing their work, but they were also being open about themselves. Listening plays a big role. Because he was listening, I was listening to him, and it helped me. And I remember after that, I felt like the sessions with my social worker was important part of my learning journey in terms of being a good parent.
The feedback we got from social workers was that they especially liked the bells that ring bit of the process because it meant that they brought their personal selves into the room, and I think that was different for them. My kind of way of thinking about it is that it increased coherence between their personal and professional selves.
I think it also highlights to us a need to understand, well, how much of us is the problem in the way that we're engaging, or the system, or the pressure, or the outcome of social services involvement, for instance. And that allows us to kind of reconsider how much of this might be us.
It can feel a bit exposing because you are relating to what part do you play in this dynamic, in this group, or what part do you play in this case? Why do you feel upset? So that's been the biggest adjustment, that we are beginning to use the ideas of it's okay to feel affected and vulnerable, but I think a lot of people have difficulty, they feel like it's not professional, they've got to keep themselves together.
Well, I think previously you're always told not to give too much of yourself. It's about them, it's about the decisions that we're trying to reach, the questions that we're trying to ask. But I think the realisation that actually we need to start with ourselves about how do we feel, and what might that mean for us.
What triggers for you, what you might feel about it.
And again, I can take feeling uncomfortable into this. Now I can explore it.
Because this is kind of difficult kind of work. We're dealing with people's kind of like lives and trauma and sort of very, very difficult experiences. And of course, you're going to have a reaction to it.
It really helped me as a parent. The upbringing we've had is not always the best, and sometimes it can shape the way we think of things and the way we parent our kids. Because I come from an African culture, it's different background, different ways of doing things. And it just helped me open my mind and open up and really make the most of the sessions we had.
As an organisation, we were given permission to be creative, to be flexible, and to think about what the model means to each and every one of us as practitioners, but also to the whole organisation, and think about how the systemic principles, rather than give us a set of practical tools, which they also do, there is a lot of fantastic tools that we've been taught, a lot of ways of thinking with a family about their problems and how we help them work through those problems. It's also given us permission to, at a very basic level, build a relationship with a family in a different way.
I think what people seemed to value was the sense of not so much theory that it felt overwhelming, but the sense that they could put a little bit of information and relate that into their practice and be able to take away with them the idea and the usefulness of, for example, genograms. If we can think about how that has impacted and had a meaningful effect on the children and families that you've been working with.
I was in a conversation with one of my staff. She has a young person, and that young person has been very rejecting of her as a social worker. They have been rejecting of most people. She said to that young person, I want you to know that I felt really upset by the letter you wrote me or the phone call we had. Afterwards, I was really left with my feelings. That was relational. And there is a challenge for this young person who is often silent to be relational. And for the first time, that social worker and that young person had a conversation where the young person said at the end of it, why didn't we do this before? It would be very easy to say, well, we haven't done this before because you wouldn't talk to me. So there is something about that being relational and constantly being aware of what is in this person's mind about me that really has assisted her. And maybe that's the beginning of a relationship.
One of the key ideas is the idea of multiple perspectives. And in some of the training workshops at the beginning, that was done in a really nice, exciting way with different glasses. So different people having different visions, different views, different lenses to look at things through. Yes, with respect to risk, there are certain things that have to be done and certain actions that have to be taken. But in understanding people and making connections with people, there are many different ways to do it.
I was just thinking about a particular case where we needed to introduce a social worker to a child who'd had quite a few changes as a social worker and quite a lot of change in her life. And we thought a lot about what that particular social worker and who he was and the experiences that he could bring to his work with the child. And we tried to use that to help with the introduction. I supported him to send the child a photograph of himself and write her a letter about who he was, what he was interested in. I think that really worked for that child because she never had that before from a social worker. She wasn't expecting it. but she was really intrigued by the material that the social worker sent. And I think it made a big difference to the first meeting that she had with him. It was using the social worker's own experiences and the person that he was. It was bringing that into the work that he was doing and the dialogue that he was having with the child.
In the beginning, it was too hard for me. You don't know where's your daughter, missing for 1 month and a half. You don't know where she, especially with danger around her, with running out in the street. And I have a lot of positive relationship with social worker, and they understand the situation. They help me when he talking to me, when he listening. That person, he will take me with my daughter to a safe place. He understand the risk. He can't see that risk, and he was just looking at me at that time and listening like someone the first time he listened. Probably he's for me, he's my hero. Yeah, my daughter, she like him. Every time she said, yeah, you check with him. If he says something, he would do it.
I think for many years, social workers were using that kind of model, but they weren't naming it. And actually, the idea of the training, what it means is that they could put names and theories to things that they were doing already. And what that has done is that it's encouraged their confidence. And also in terms of how I do things, the idea of thinking about yourself, about your own experiences, thinking about the workers that you're dealing with and their own experiences, and about the client. For many years, I've saying to workers, you need to do a chronology, and also you need to do a genogram. And one of the parts of the training when we had to do that ourselves. And it's amazing how much I learned about myself by actually going through that experience. And I think that's one of the good things about systemic practice is that it lets you experience those things yourself, so that it's real. Because I think sometimes if you've been doing social work for a long time, you tend to get into a routine of doing stuff. But actually, I think the systemic way gets you to think differently.
It's really important, I think, to say that we haven't got something which is a product that is completed. This journey doesn't really end, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The needs in the community are changing constantly, but also we're learning both from our experience and from each other, but we're learning from the children and the families, the experts by experience. So we're constantly thinking and tacking and just challenging ourselves about both the type of intervention, the type of practice, but also the structures that support that practice. And of course, there is one last really important component, and that is that the workforce is constantly changing. We have new people coming in, we have people promoted or moving on to new roles, and that means that not only are we having to train and develop people to work in this way, but they bring their own experiences and they bring their own insights. And as they do those things, we refine the model. And so it really is a collaborative approach, and it's one which means that it never really ends, but always stays true to the values and principles that we've established.